And the baby will lie there, and the mother will feed during the day, not too far away. But she could still be a good distance where we don't see her. Then there are people walking around in the fields and find a small deer lying on the ground. They think it's abandoned. It's orphaned. He's pitiful. He'll die. So they collect it. But in fact, the little deer is in its place. He's fine, and the mother is nearby. Obviously, with their large ears and their big eyes, they're really beautiful, but we should leave them to nature.
Oh, it's frozen the water.
Therefore, here we have in fact deer that are ultra tamed, because most of them were raised by bottle, followed then by generations of parents raised by bottle. So they teach their young ones not to be afraid of humans. And there are so many visitors that they produce friendly white-tailed deer that people can pet.
No, running in front of you.
So this is a very interesting area, this section here, to go walking among the deer, to feed them, touch them. One really has a good proximity to the animals in this part.
No, I don't have anything. I have nothing. Nothing for you. Don't look so despaired.
Brum has been living here since 2010. Wildlife officers brought him here when he was barely 2 weeks old. He was bottle fed. He was very fragile because it's very difficult for a moose to pull through an ordeal. It remains very delicate. So we worked hard for him to survive. Furthermore, a moose becomes very attached to humans once it is familiar. It becomes downright dependent. Well, we spent a lot of time with him, but we have a human life to live as well. We can't spend it all with the moose, even spending nights. So we introduced him to a goat to keep him company. So that's why we now have in the pen here, Brum and Copain, his friend the goat. And Brum is fantastic. He's super nice.
Instructions well.
Parc Omega.
Au cours des récentes années, on peut dater ça.
The park, in recent years, dating back to the early 2000s, gradually developed a new vocation, which is to actually be a concentrate, not only of nature and landscape and places of Quebec and the Outaouais, but with an added historical dimension, cultural dimension, and artistic dimension.
Culturelle, une dimension artistique.
So, to give an illustration, there is now a historical presentation, which is the First Nations Trail. And on this trail, we will present the Native American approach through works of art by totem representations. It's also called the Trail of the Talking Trees. So these totems represent each of the nations of Quebec.
Ces totems représentent chacune des nations.
Then there is the representation of the Thunderbird, a Native American legend, followed by the Totem of the Seven Fires, which will represent yet another Indian prophecy of our time. And so, in this geographical space dedicated to First Nations, which includes this small lake, all these representations were made by the Algonquin artist Denis Charette. So we did a great job, thanks to Jocelyn McNichol, who approached every nation, we managed to in fact develop an area dedicated to First Nations, and where we try to give the keys, an illustration, and above all beauty of this philosophy, this whole history that has deeply marked Quebec.
On est en territoire amérindien.
We are on Native American territory, so we will do something with and about the First Nations.
Jocelyne McNichol.
Moi, je crois que
I believe that I believe that the myth manifested itself because it's the Thunderbird. And on the day of the inauguration, we had a thunderstorm. And when I shook hands with Olivier, there was a clap of thunder in the mountains. We looked at each other. We didn't say a word, but we realized that Algonquin territory, the Anishinaabe territory here, had just confirmed the presence of the Thunderbird. That day, June 23rd, 2011, there was a flood in Gatineau. The water rose everywhere. My wife told me that evening, is there a way to put out your Thunderbird, to turn it off? It's raining pretty hard. I said, I don't know. I don't have control of this. Presented on the First Nations Trail. The word totem is part of the Algonquin language. In the West, the Haida, the Salish, all the peoples of the West Coast, totem does not exist in their language. The word totem comes from here. It is Algonquin. It means the spirit within us, or the link that unites us. Totem, toteman, o toteman, means the connection between the human spirit and the animal spirit. Children were named according to an animal, and each animal, which was his totem name, was also a learning. The animals we see here in the park, they're all part of the territory, but they have a force. They have qualities, they have unique characteristics, and we learned from this. The beaver is the engineer, the eagle is the great spirit. It is the sun. It flies very high in the sky. So each animal has its significance. DNA. And that we go back to the essence of things, which is our Mother Earth. That we have one nature, one planet. And let's take care of it, because if it is no more, then we have nothing to stand on. Perhaps this work will emanate that for people who visit it. So that's the first one we will face. And as we enter the path, there will be two crows, two raven sculptures, who are the guardians of all 10 totems and inukshuks that are on the trail. Then we'll experience the nations of the territory. Each sculpture will make us experience something special, to remind us that these people are still alive today. They live there. We can visit them if we want. They will welcome us. We will go around the province of Quebec via the First Nations, and at the end, when we will have visited all the nations, we see the Thunderbird. We pass beneath them, and the Thunderbird, what does he do? He does that. A flash of lightning. And once you've exited, you've had a complete experience. So with my work, I try to contribute just a little to a small part of the history of the native North Americans. In my little life lived, I might have installed works that will continue to speak, that will make future generations converse.
Parc Omega.
Un autre lieu, c'est tout l'espace.
Another area is the space dedicated to colonization. It begins with the trading post. It was the fur trade that developed there. It was made for the 400th anniversary of the arrival of Champlain in the region. We also developed the presentation of the old farmhouse, which depicts how settlers lived in 1850, the date of the construction of this house. But through it all, the trading post, the farm, and the sugar shack as well, we find the most recent history of Quebec through colonization. There were trading posts up until 1850, because there was a Hudson Bay Company that arrived afterwards. But this here model is pretty representative of the first trading posts during the time of New France. They were the first trading posts of the 18th century.
Like a bull.
Donc, ça raconte l'histoire.
It tells the story of the fur trade in the Outaouais region.
Alors ici,
I don't like it.
Here we have a kind of small counter with the skins that were used for trading.
c'était avec les Amérindiens que
It was with the Native Americans that the main exchanges were made.
ils n'avaient pas d'instruments en métal.
They had no metal tools.
Comme les
They were very much looking for pots and kettles. They also liked having guns.
on échangeait.
Beaver pelts were often traded against the height of a gun.
Et puis ici, on a des petites perles de verre. Ça
And
s'appelle
here we have glass beads,
servait à
known as beadwork,
leurs vêtements.
which was used to decorate their clothing.
Ils faisaient leurs beaux motifs avec des...
Before, the Native Americans made their beautiful patterns with porcupine quills, which they dyed with vegetable dye, and it was very long.
Don't go in front of the car.
When the
Suicidal.
white man came, they offered beads of colored glass in exchange for their furs, and Native Americans immediately adopted them to decorate their moccasins, their mittens, and their clothing.
On a aussi tout ce qui
We
pouvait
also have
servir
everything that could be of use in a trading post.
ou les
The Native Americans, or the woodrunners, would come to supply themselves.
Please fasten driver's seat belts.
Stores of the time.
Whoa.
So let's assume that I was out on the rapids and whoops, I break my boat. What do I do? Well, I'll stop at the next trading post and I'll pick up some birch bark, perhaps a little resin, and some roots to stitch my canoe. So it was like a convenience store. I'm out of sugar, I have no more flour to make my cakes. Well, I'll come here to get some, and always in exchange for skins or fur.
Le wampum, c'était un objet
A
d'échange.
wampum was an object of exchange. It's a woven shell belt, and it was the guarantee of the plighted
Le
word.
wampum était fait avec un...
Wampums were made with a shell that came from the American coast.
C'était quelque chose de quand même...
It was something very ceremonial. To guarantee you my word, I give you a wampum.
Ok. Alors,
I will no longer go to war with you. Here, I have 10 wampums to guarantee you my word.
et toi, en retour, tu me donnes aussi...
You, in return, will also give me wampums to show me that you accept, and that you will keep your word as well.
tenir ta parole. Le wampum
The
était...
wampum were preserved by an important personage of the nation.
La colonie française, jusqu'avant la Grande Paix amérindienne, les...
Until the Great Peace, the French were ready to leave because there were so many wars with the Iroquois and life was so hard that they said, no, this is nonsense.
Et Monsieur de Caillère,
And Monsieur de Caillère convened the Indian chiefs of all the nations in 1701 to sign the Great Peace.
et là, à ce moment-là, il avait fait faire...
And for the occasion, he had made over 100 wampums to be able to exchange with the chiefs that were present.
Et tout le monde a signé.
Everyone signed the Great Peace in 1701, and it really was a kind of new beginning for the colony.
It's right in front of the car.
Dans le poste de traite, on a...
In the trading post, we have a fabulous bark canoe, which was made by Hyacinthe Canard Blanc, an Algonquin from Lac Simon. He made this canoe in 1950. The famous bark canoes were really the means of transport around here. These were canoes that could hold up to 4 tons of merchandise. It took at least 12 men to drive them. These were men, and you know we should be proud of this. These people crossed America. They were tough men of incredible endurance, carrying tons of merchandise. Their canoes on their back. Sometimes it took 6 men to carry a canoe. It was an extraordinary life. And the guys who chose it, well, they loved it. It was freedom. To them, it was also the freedom to move in with Native American women. It's clear. So this farm is very representative of that stage in the colonization of this region. And this is the model. These are the small instruments that a gentleman named Léon Hyperciel fabricated as a hobby. During his retirement, he remade small agricultural implements of the 19th century. And they are highlighted by this model. By reconstituting a kind of large farm as there was, by recounting the kind of life that people had, one can see, for example, that during the winter, people did not shovel. They simply crushed the snow with rollers. And since there were no tractors, because horses were mainly used, all the instruments here were designed for use with horses. So it's a very large model. And on the other side, this is the workshop of Georges Racicot. It really is a creative spirit in Quebec, an artistic spirit that is very much alive. I wanted to represent that in the park, because it's part of the soul of the Outaouais. Here it's called La Petite Nation, this area around Montebello, Papineauville, and the surrounding villages. So here we have very strong creative talent, represented by artists such as Denis Charette, such as Michel Terrien, who sculpted the Enchanted Forest House. There are also many works of art by Georges Racicot that are at the farm. They call themselves non-contaminated artists, or unruly artists, because they do things as they feel them, without perhaps any formation or...
Go with deer?
I started perhaps 20 years ago as a hobby, carving, self-taught, a passion.
Michel Terrien.
I've been coming to the park for maybe 8 to 10 years and doing animal sculptures. I've made signboards, we made many wildlife projects. This contract is a little more ambitious, but very inspiring. Attracted by something quite mysterious, which is in fact a call for Quebec, for the beauty of this nature, for these spaces, the magic of these beautiful places, and this immense breathing, which basically brought me here. I had the extraordinary privilege to participate in this project, this possibility of creation with all these extraordinary people who participated in the project. And I have a huge and wonderful pleasure to build, to dream, to imagine something, to talk with people, to be out there. You never plan ahead too much. The projects progress as we go along. Time put things in their place. Besides, I think we say time does not respect something that is done without it. Well, here in fact, we really respect time.
Par exemple, le projet du lac des Truites.
For example, the Trout Lake project, the First Nations Trail, it had a first stage 10 years ago. This place was beautiful. The public could not access it, so one fine day we decided to create a path to access it. And then after that, we were offered 80 deer. So we closed the area and we put them in this spot.
Et puis après ça,
After that, we began to develop the First Nations aspect with the Thunderbird. And then, but that was 3 years after we opened the zone, we allowed visitors to feed the trout. And then 2 years later, we created a small waterfall that is over there and the trail surrounding it. And another 2 years later, it was the picnic area, attired in teepee shapes. And then we created the Path of the Talking Trees, the Totem Trail, and now, this year, there will be the Totem of the Seven Fires and the portico entrance. And that area took maybe 10 years to find its breath and its place.
The park's open year-round, on Christmas, New Year's Day, Easter. Basically, the park's never closed. When people are on vacation, you need other people working.
Parc Omega.
History of the park. Olivier Favre.
la propriété a été
The land
acquise.
for the park was originally purchased by Mr. Hudson, an automobile manufacturer in Detroit. He bought the land in the 1930s, during the glory years of Chateau Montebello.
Caribou,
The land was then
bison,
sold to a religious community who ran a boarding school here for several years. The next owner was a real estate developer from Montreal who built a secondary residence where he would entertain guests. Many of the developer's friends were famous performers. One of them, French singer Joe Dassin, wrote the music for the well-known French song L'été indien while on vacation.
Parc Omega.
Les coyotes se
Where
promènent
you
en liberté.
cute?
The coyotes wander around free